Welcome to the Brown CS IPP Alumni Interview Series. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Tiffany Chen, a distinguished alumnus of Brown University. Tiffany, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
To start, could you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yes. So let's see. I graduated from Brown back in 2018, which both feels like very recent, but also I guess it's quite a long time ago at this point. When I was at Brown, I concentrated in CS econ, leaned mostly towards the CS side, and then on the CS side, leaned pretty heavily towards like the front end, like graphical UI side of the house. I ended up, maybe it's worth talking about like some of the things that I did at Brown too. So at Brown, was pretty heavily involved in Hack at Brown. So that was my big thing. Through Hack at Brown, really discovered a love and passion for design. So that was like kind of what piqued my interest in design in the first place. From there, did a couple of different internships. One of them dabbled in design, a couple others looked at HCI research. But then from there, my first full-time job was at Microsoft, so moved out from Rhode Island to Seattle. At Microsoft, I was a UX designer on the accessibility team, so thinking about how to design basically like any sort of experience for someone who may not have full mobility, full hearing, full vision. And so some of the products that I built from the ground up were voice access, so like controlling your device purely with your voice, very cool project. And then also live captions, so the ability to get captioning for any application, any audio coming out of your system on Windows, which was also pretty cool. And then I was there for 3 years, and then after that, I jumped over to a startup, which I'm currently at today, called Anduril, and they focus on building out defense software for the government.
Cool. Could you tell us a little more about your current role?
Yeah, so right now I'm both a product designer and then also a product design manager, so kind of wearing two hats at once and doing many responsibilities. Uh, I would say that the things that I work on at Anduril kind of span the gamut, to be honest. But the way I think about it is like all of the software that I'm designing right now and all of the experiences I'm working on are intended to help folks who are kind of at the front line in these high stress situations make better informed decisions in very short, compressed timeframes. And so to give some examples, we've got a Group 2 unmanned aerial system, a drone basically, probably like 5 feet or 6 feet in length. It's primarily used for reconnaissance missions, which means you send it out like many miles ahead of you to investigate something that's going on, to like gather situational awareness and information such that you can figure out what you want to do next. And so I build out the command and control platform for that drone. So basically, all of the UI, like the graphical interfaces that a soldier would use to actually control this drone, both autonomously but also manually. So that's sort of one persona that I help design for. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's also this like commander level figure who wants to have this big picture view of the world. So picture like an actual globe, and all of the things that could be happening or like across the different countries. So how does that sort of figure ingest a ton of information and make decisions based off of that information to actually affect more tactical strategy?
Wow, that sounds like a super cool role, and I think a lot of students will agree with me on that. Thank you so much for telling us about that. But for now, for current Brown students thinking about course choices, could you tell us about the classes you took at Brown that you feel helped the most in your current role?
Yes. Yeah. So probably the most obvious one, but then also by far the most impactful one was CS 1300. Is it still called CS 1300 now, or
Yeah,
has it changed
still called it.
numbers?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So that's the one taught by Jeff Wong. A really great intro course and crash course in many ways to like core UX, you like user experience, usability fundamentals. So a lot of the things that you learned there around like what does it mean to offer affordances in your interface, whether it's a digital one or an analog one? What does it mean to make something discoverable? What does it mean to actually make something learnable? Like these are all very common design patterns and pillars that I lean on today that get brought up in critique when designers bring their work to show and get feedback on. What does it mean to run like a good user test? What is like a statistically significant like pool of users that you actually need to be able to make claims about the things that you're designing. Yeah, all of these things learned in CS 1300. So can't say enough good things about that course. I've also, I think over the years, it has also become like a way to help students build out their portfolios and add projects to their portfolios. So that's another perk. If you're interested in going into design, you can build your portfolio while you're also taking a class. And then I guess the other course that helped me, I don't think I included this in my textual responses, but there was a RISD course that I took around illustration. And then that one was quite interesting because it also dived into color. So like color theory, why you use certain colors, color contrast, like when you lay a warm color on top of a cool color, how does that affect users' perceptions? How does it like evoke an emotional response in you? And so I believe that course was called What's Your Story? And it was taught by Mary Jane Begin. But yeah, those two stand out to me pretty strongly.
Awesome. Can you also share a bit about your journey from your time at Brown to your current position? What were the key milestones or experiences that led you here?
Ooh, so I'd say like the first big turning point for me, which I almost consider my lucky break, was my junior year. I was pretty high conviction that I didn't want to go into a software engineering role. I just knew that that wasn't quite what I was looking for. I wanted something like a bit more human interfacing, a bit more visual. And so at the time, I thought, hey, there's design, which I feel very highly unqualified for, but maybe I could scrounge things together and maybe someone would take a chance on me to actually give me an internship opportunity for user experience stuff. And so over the course of probably like September to October of my junior year, I just started throwing together a ton of side projects that I'd worked on. To give an example, there was like one small thing that I did where I thought like, hey, why are traffic lights all just round with colors in them? Like that's not very accessible for people who are colorblind. Like how do people who are colorblind actually navigate traffic lights? Do they just have to memorize the placement of like which one's red, which one's yellow, which one's green? Don't really know. So had done some light research there, asked some of my friends who were colorblind, and then I ended up with like a mini case study for myself where I like changed the way that traffic lights were designed, which was both like a fun exercise, but also kind of something you can showcase as like a design case study. So that was just one of the things that I had in my portfolio. I shot it off to probably like 30 different companies, if not more than that. The thing worth noting there is I remember going to the tech recruiting fairs that the Brown CS department hosted, going up to a lot of the booths and asking, hey, do you guys have UX internships or product design internships? And always getting the answer of like, no, sorry, but we do have lots of software engineering internships. If you're interested in design, you're welcome to apply through our portal. And so that's what I had to do at the time, was just like go on to different company portals and apply through there. But luckily, of those like 30 places that I applied to, 30 plus, a couple of them responded back to me. So went through the portfolio process, went through like the whiteboarding challenge processes, and then eventually was lucky enough that Microsoft decided to offer me an internship for the summer. So that was like the first big turning point. The second big one for me was probably jumping from Microsoft to Anduril, where had started at a big company, kind of learned about big company processes, standards, fundamentals for design, but then felt empowered enough to kind of go off and like join a startup that moved faster, that was a bit scrappier, that needed more design autonomy. Yeah.
Awesome. Could you describe what your day-to-day looks like in your current role and like how collaborative is your current work environment?
Yes. So from a day-to-day perspective, it varies a decent amount depending on both the projects that I'm working on and then also where I am in the design process. So to give some examples here, as a designer, you're probably not just working on one single feature or product. You are most likely working on like several features or several products at a time. And so with me, I had one project on Ghost, which is that drone that I'd mentioned. Because it's so hardware based as well as software based, there were often times where I would be down in California. So Anduril's headquarters are in Irvine. I'd be at our test range, kind of observing how operators are actually flying the drone today, like gathering feedback on the existing UI, making notes of pain points. But then I would like take all of those insights back to my desk, crack open Figma and start thinking about what are the ways that we could actually address some of those user pain points in the next iteration or the next release of our UI. So that's kind of what it looks like. But then also other times we've got like other projects that we're working on that require just like scrappy prototyping. And so I could just be in Figma, like trying to hook up an Xbox game controller to my prototype to like simulate actually moving an autonomous vehicle around, to see how that feels before devs start working against it. So lots of different things going on. There's also the regular like hop on Zoom meetings or be in a conference room with tons of people and weigh in on like design requirements or user experience, or channel the voice of the user during critical discussions that tends to lean more technical. So lots of stuff.
Yeah, well, that sounds super cool. Um, you mentioned your internship at Microsoft as like a key turning point. How do you think the Microsoft and also, I guess, your full-time job in the industry kind of prepared you for your current role?
So with the Microsoft internship, I think the thing that really, or I guess there were two things that really helped prepare me. The first one was the structure of the internship program itself was quite nice in that it like led all UX interns through the standard end-to-end design process. And so for me, that was my first real exposure to design, like out in the industry. And so that was just really critical. I remember like being given a problem statement when I first got to Microsoft where they said, how do we make browsing the web more inclusive? And that was it. And I was like, what do you mean that's it? I thought that you would give me more to work with. But so it ended up being like a really fun deep dive into uncovering user needs, interviewing users to understand how they're browsing the web today with Edge, and then like coming up with my own hypothesis. So being very hypothesis driven. And then from there, like going through the motions of getting feedback, working on designs, iterating with the design team. That was all just like stuff that I think you need to go through at least once to really understand what it means to be a designer. And even then, you probably have to go through it a couple more times to really understand. So that was the first part that helped. And then the second part, I think, was I had a really great mentor when I was an intern at Microsoft. And so I think what he did for me was he was really able to hone in on my strengths, but then also my weaknesses. And then like specifically for those weaknesses or areas to improve, work with me and like give me concrete feedback as to how I could become a better designer, and how I could prepare myself for future opportunities. And so he'd say things like, you need to have a better understanding of grid systems, or you need to brush up on typography, which is totally fair because never taken classes for those before. And so I think finding a design mentor is super, super helpful, especially when you're early in career or looking to break into design.
Thank you. And finally, what advice do you have for current students worrying over career aspects, especially during the special time of like industry-wide layoffs?
Yeah. So we were kind of talking about this earlier before we started recording, but I'll share this anecdote too, just because I think it's pretty compelling and maybe like helpful to understand what's happening, both not just from a student side, but also from like an interviewer side too. Anduril, we released our first round of product design internship applications around this time last year. And honestly, we weren't expecting anyone to apply because we were like, who knows about Anduril? Who cares about Anduril? No one. But to our surprise, we ended up getting over 200 applicants within the first 2 weeks of us opening up those applications. And then of those 200 applicants, like at least 30 of them were actually folks who had already graduated from college. So like out of their senior year, should have been looking for full-time positions. But I guess because of the scarcity of them, ended up applying for internships instead. And so I guess I say, like, I share this story just to give a sense of it's not simply a problem at Brown. I think this is more of an industry-wide problem right now where there is just like a lack of opportunity, especially for early in career students, either for full-time positions or otherwise. But so I guess maybe some advice that I would give is like, don't just look for full-time positions. Internship positions are really great ways to convert into full-time. That is actually something that we did with one of our most recent interns. She had graduated already, and then after the internship, she directly fed into full-time. So that's certainly an option. I would say just like really not thinking too hard about the places you're applying to and like being very liberal with how wide you're casting your net is always a good thing too. I thought that helped me, especially when I didn't know much about design. And I thought that my opportunities were quite slim. Just like trying to increase the quantity of applications you send out will also be very helpful. And then also just, yeah, reaching out to folks who are already in industry, getting their advice, getting referrals, probably all the things that people know already, but those certainly help too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. Your journey from Brown to your current role is really inspiring, super informative for our audience. We really appreciate your time and wish you the best. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, William.